views and comments of the hosts and guests are not necessarily those of the station.
Hi, I'm Mark Lopez and I'm inviting you to watch Pugad Vloggers, the show that tackles the latest issues in social media on DZRJ 8:10 AM Radyo Bandido TV.
Watch and listen to Pugad Vloggers, Monday to Friday from 7 p.m. to 8 p.m. Airing on Sky Cable Channel 224 and on all DTT boxes. Simulcasting online on Facebook and YouTube. Listen and watch on your mobile devices. Just search DZRJ Radio Bandido.
Pugad Vloggers, Pugad Vloggers, ang kurap titirisin, salot sa bayan wawalisin, walang sasantuhin, ang saya-saya nakakabaliw, kasama natin ang tropa. Pugad Vloggers, Pugad Vloggers.
Okay, magandang gabi sa inyong lahat mga kaibigan at kababayan. Ako po si Orion Perez Dumdum at nandito po tayo sa ating programa na Pugad Vloggers. And ladies and gentlemen, meron po akong special guest tonight. Okay, so ito po isang bigatin na tao ito, no? Basically kasama ko siya doon sa House hearings on ang tawag nito, the Committee of the Whole, no? So hearings tungkol sa 𝗕𝗵𝗱7, which is all about amending the economic provisions. Well, actually, 3 economic provisions of the 1987 Constitution. Pero syempre, kaming mga magkakaibigan na nandun sa grupo, lahat kami ay nagsasabi na mas maganda nga na hindi lamang itong 3 ang tututukan, kundi lahat ng mga economic restrictions ay kung pwede nga ay tanggalin, hindi lang lalagyan ng itong unless otherwise provided by law. So ayun po mga kaibigan at mga kababayan, mga tagapakinig ng ating programa ngayon. Ang may guest po tayo, isa po siyang economist at civil servant doon sa Office of the Premier of the State of South Australia. Okay, basically dual citizen po siya ng Philippines and ng Australia, at doon po siya sa may Adelaide area nakatira, no? Sa South Australia. Basically ano siya, doctor na po siya, no? So PhD siya at isa siya sa mga eksperto na tinanong ng mga legislators natin, ating mga kongresista, tungkol sa bakit nga ba importante na baguhin natin ang saligang batas para either mapawalang bisa o at least man lang mapaluwag itong mga economic provisions ng 1987 Constitution. So without much further ado, I'd like to call on my friend, my colleague, itong masasabi nating magaling sa economics na kaibigan namin, si 𝗕𝗹𝗱 Santos. Welcome to the show, 𝗕𝗹. Naka-on na ba yung camera mo? Ayan, naka-camera. Ayan, pareho tayong naka-Amerikana.
Oo nga, ginagayat kita, nakita kita. Ilitan tuloy ako magbihis din. Okay. So.
Ayun. So, 𝗕𝗹, ano bang nakikita natin na mukhang maganda yata ang nangyayari? So, at least man lang doon sa House, there's movement, there's traction. I think, if I'm not mistaken, nasa 3rd reading na yata sila, and it looks
pasado
like
na.
Pasado na, no? So, so kumbaga pasado na, anything to do with the House, involvement of the House, okay na, no? So ang hinihintay na lang yata natin is the Senate, no? And then if I'm not mistaken, ang House at ang Senate are supposed to also have their own parang joint session where they will iron out any tawag nito, yung para ma-harmonize yata yung dalawang versions na meron sila. Diba? And then after that, they are supposed to do a separate voting, no?
If they pass the same resolution, no? Kasi sa ngayon 𝗕𝗵𝗱 6 and 7 are identical.
They're identical, no? If I'm not mistaken, I think the the original difference was just that one was saying something like jointly, or the other one was saying separately, or something to that
Yes,
effect,
yes.
no? Parang ganon.
The
Pero
Senate had that kulatilla because they were worried that the House would override them. Ang House naman adopted the Senate's version. I mean, adopted the Senate's resolution with RBH 7 para wala nang kailangang
pag-awayan, di ba? Para wala nang away.
So really, kung maipasa ng both houses yung bawat resolution nila, it's still to be worked out what the process is. Pero if both houses vote separately, pass their respective resolutions, and then there's no difference between the two, then yun, baka the question is, magjo-joint sitting pa ba sila where they will, parang formalities sake na lang yung sasabihin nila, okay, we pass this with 3/4, we pass this with 3/4. That's what the Constitution mandates, di ba?
Yes, yes.
So, in the joint sitting, baka gawing official na lang yun. Ito na yung boto.
Tingin ko nga, ganon.
There's sabi ni Representative Suarez, he's the deputy speaker.
Deputy speaker siya. Yes.
So sabi niya, tawag nito, sabi niya, itong Holy Week na darating, gagamitin nila yung panahon para ma-iron out para makipag-usap na sa mga senador na kung ano bang prosesong gusto nila na maganda na gawin, no? This of course assumes na maipapasa ng Senado 'yan. And ang latest yata na nanggagaling kay Senate President Zubiri sisikapin daw nilang maipasa 'yan bago mag-SONA ang presidente.
Okay,
sa Hulyo na 'yon, no? July.
So, huli na yun. Okay. So in a way, parang wala namang so-called deadline na parang, oops, Holy Week pala yung parang yung deadline, so to speak. Tapos, pag nalampasan yung Holy Week, tapos yung Senado hindi pala nagawa, patay na. Wala namang ganon. It's actually parang SONA yata yung hinahabol pala nila.
Well, kumbaga, they're both marching to their own drum beat, ano? The House wanted it passed before Holy Week, their version, yung sa kanila. And then, the Senate marches to its own drum beat.
I don't know.
Pero ang ano naman nila na gagawin, kailangan matapos to bago, way before mag-filing na ng candidacies in October.
Yes.
Matutuon na doon yung attention ng mga legislators, and parang pag iniwan, if they leave it too late. And by the way, yung SONA kasi marks a new sitting of Congress, so they want to get passed within this sitting.
That's right.
Of the Congress, 19th Congress ba to? Parang so kailangan maipasa before the SONA ng presidente. And I know they will go on break before that, di ba?
Yes, magkakaroon nga sila ng break.
So before they go on break, dapat maipasa nila yan. Well, minsan sinisingit pa nila right before the joint, yung minsan may nagkakatuhan pa, di ba? Bago noon. Pero yun ang nabalitaan ko, from just watching
I don't know if you've heard this joke, no? So I heard this joke from a fellow Atenean. A little bit of trivia. So this guy actually is from Pisay. So high school Pisay, tapos Ateneo College. And then he was with the lower house, so a congressman. And then later on was brought into the executive branch. So I had a great chat with him. Turns out we knew a lot of people from school in common, no? So parang he became a good friend also. And then basically he had this joke. Sabi niya, I won't say who he is because well, his joke kind of hurts feelings of people in the upper house. Pero sabi niya, well, this is prevailing joke. This is prevailing joke within the no, the lower house, within the house daw, sabi niya. There are two houses of Congress. One is the lower house and the other one is the slower house. So medyo I don't know, I don't know why pero totoo kasi medyo mas mabagal kumilos yung isa. Although actually konti lang sila. You'd have expected na them being, fewer in number, they should actually be able to do things faster. Pero I don't know why the one with more people, well,
Yeah.
they have more people, but they all represent constituencies. So I guess there's a bit more of urgency. Mukhang may urgency sila dun sa lower house Whereas sa upper house parang ewan talaga. I mean, we do have friends there. I mean, we've got
Oh, yeah.
Senator Robin Padilla, you've got your kinakapatid na si Senator Angara and all that. So we've got friends and allies there. But yun na nga, it's just that there's a slightly different way of doing things that makes them a bit slower. So
Yeah. I mean,
hopefully they can make things a bit faster para hindi tayo maiwanan ng panahon di ba?
oh, ang ano kasi is like, ang general impression daw kasi is yung house, basically, dahil kaalyado ng Malacanang yan because yung speaker usually comes, is with the president.
Yes.
Is part of the president's party. In this case, he's not, but he's related to the president.
Yes.
And so therefore, the House will just fall in line with whatever Malacanang sets, and then usually the Senate is regarded as more independent. But having observed the senators, well, having observed the congressmen as well at work, nung nandun ako, at least in that one day na nandun ako, you were there much longer for 6 days. Ata, nandun ka,
Oo.
Lapad ka talaga, So, what I noticed though is seryoso yung mga kongresista. Hindi
Seryoso
lang sila
talaga.
rubber stamp. Talagang gusto nilang pag-usapan yung issues, nagtatanong sila. And across party lines,
Yes, that's true.
Nagulat ako like si Representative Stella from Marikina. And then you had other members there like si 𝗕𝗵𝗴𝗱. And and then the leadership sila Representative Garin, they ask serious questions, Hindi katulad sa Senado na yung mga ilang senador, yung sa when I went there, so in the Senate I went twice. And I noticed that yung ilang senador, even though mas maiksi yung session sa Senado, yung sa House kasi buong araw tsaka magdamag kuminsan
Oo, abot ng 10 PM yun sa House.
Yung Senado minsan mag-start ng 10 hanggang 2:00 lang, ganyan. Pero yung sa House minsan, anong oras ba tayo nag-start? Simula 9 o'clock sharp, di ba?
Mga 10 naman.
Mga 10
siya nag-start. 10 nag-start.
Pero hanggang 10 ng gabi, kung minsan madaling araw pa nga inaabutan. So yung ilang senador doon, papasok lang sila, magbabasa lang sila ng statement, and then saka aalis na sila. Hindi
Aalis na.
Pakikinggan yung mga resource persons. So kumbaga nagbigay lang sila ng statement, tapos alis na sila. And maybe because it's a function na mas konti sila, so they have to go to their other committees na mas priority nila. Nagpapakita lang sila doon para magbigay ng statement, tapos alis na. And then yung iba naman, basta parang, so naiiwan lang, 1, 2 senador na nandun. Whereas sa Kongreso, talagang yung mga yung mga interesado talaga, like baski yung Makabayan Bloc nandun, kumpleto sila, the ones who opposed, the ones who were for it, they're always there represented. And they really sit in and ask questions, interpellate. So it's a different
Different dynamic,
So whereas I think, okay, they're saying they're asserting their independence, pero in terms of legislation and in terms of I find it weird, strangely enough, that the House in this particular regard appears to be even more progressive
Yes.
in their thinking than the senators. And I wonder why. Maybe it's because they represent the people in the
Specific
region.
districts. Yeah, they have specific districts or specific sectors that they represent. So,
Yes.
diba?
So-
They answer to someone to a specific group of people. I think that's the difference.
And they also represent a local community or economy.
Yes.
Na kapag tinanong mo sila, siguro, ano bang kailangan ng mga constituents mo? Siyempre, ang sasagutin nila, ang gusto namin magkaroon ng employment, hindi lang sa Metro Manila. Gusto namin lumago yung ekonomiya namin dito, yung kakataon na magkaroon ng trabaho, ganyan. And I guess what they're finding is that a lot of the businesses, a lot of their economies, like if you're a congressman or a town mayor or a provincial governor, a lot of them are controlled also by Manila, also the businesses.
That's
Because na-dominate na talaga ng ilang kumpanya, ng ilang pamilya actually, yung mga negosyo sa buong Pilipinas, no? So it doesn't matter if we're in Metro Manila or if you're in Davao or in Iloilo or Cebu or in Albay, parang it's the same sets of businesses that are there, owned by the same conglomerates, pati yung mga bangko, ganyan.
Yes,
So,
yes.
And I guess I feel that they're not attached to those elites. They're not. Ang gusto nga nila is maybe magkaroon pa ng ibang investment. And
more
then,
choices, more
Yeah.
options, di ba?
And maybe there aren't enough manufacturing jobs. There aren't enough yung sa industriya talaga. Like what we have are mainly services,
Yeah,
Yun.
yeah.
hotels, banks, airlines, department, malls, puro malls
Oo.
na lang eh.
Tapos
Parang-
usually service kasi generally, it seems like service type jobs, they tend to require a little bit of more education, whereas
Yes.
manufacturing, kung factory job, it's a bit more manual labor type, no? Parang assembly of machinery or assembly of stuff.
Semi-skilled or, yeah.
So pwedeng yung mga taong wala masyado na pag-aralan, so you're able to actually help a wider base of people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds pag ganun. Pero yun nga, I think that's why they're very serious about
Yeah.
trying to find these kinds of
I mean,
opportunities.
meron din yung IT business process outsourcing sa mga, pero sa syudad lang yon. And usually, and that's the reason why nagkakabuhol-buhol ang traffic in all our major cities, is because our economy is very service-oriented. And so these businesses, they tend to locate in the central business district because it's more efficient for all the skilled laborers from all around to just go to the center. Whereas a manufacturing, it's usually located outside the city center, outside, no? And so in an economy, for example, I've been to Vietnam where they have overtaken us, and yet the traffic situation in Vietnam isn't as bad, despite the fact that I think they only have one subway. They don't have like many buses. I didn't see many. Their public transportation system is less developed than ours, but it's because most of the jobs being created are in manufacturing. They are based outside the city. So therefore, hindi nako-congest yung mga syudad. Para sa atin na service-oriented, wala gaanong industriya. So, yung ating mamamayan naghahanap ng trabaho sa
City centers.
Yeah, kasi nandun yung lahat ng mga malls, nandun lahat ng mga opisina, ganyan. So, ganun po. Nakakalungkot that like yung mga senador parang sarado na yung nakikita mo eh. Hindi na sila open dun sa proposition and may nahalo ng mali siya eh. Kumbaga eh,
Oo
parang
nga eh.
pinag-iisipan nila na sisingitan to siguro ng political provision sa bandang huli. Kaya
Nawiwirduhan ako dun sa issue na yan kasi parang teka lang, kapag let's say, sabihin natin may na-insert nga, no? Doon sa, let's say, sa House version, nagkaroon ng ganyan. Yung version nyo wala. So, ibig sabihin, hindi pa rin mapapasa. So, meaning to say, di ba parang, nakalimutan ba nila na yung proseso na para ipapasa nila yung isang resolution, kinakailangan maging pareho yung resolution ng dito sa House at pati na dun sa sa Senado. So kung yun nga, kung sakaling nagkaroon ng insertion na hindi nila gusto na nandun sa House tapos yung sa Senate ayaw nila yon, obviously hindi matutuloy kasi nga nagkaiba, biglang nagkaroon ng pinagkaiba, di ba? So that itself is already parang there's already that tawag nito, yung pwede silang makapag-veto doon. So parang tapos meron pa nga yung yung plebiscite pa na mangyayari. So parang come on guys, you've still got
correct.
At least two veto points there na parang yung ayaw, kung meron talagang mangyayari na hindi niyo gusto, there are two opportunities to prevent it from happening.
I think their fear is sa bicameral because what we're following is the Joaquin-Bernas option na wala namang constituent assembly sa constitution in the word itself.
The word itself is not there, yeah.
It says that Congress, by a vote of 3/4 of all its members, can pass an amendment or a revision to the constitution. But one of the framers of the 87, si Father Joaquin-Bernas, who has passed away, his opinion was that they don't need to pass it, but they don't need to sit jointly. I mean, they don't need to convene a constituent assembly. They can just pass it like any normal legislation. But the threshold for passage is higher. It's 3/4 instead of a majority. Now, because of that, some feel that when you pass legislation in our bicameral system, nakakaroon ng reconciliation of the versions through the bicam. So dun nila iniisip na baka may mangyaring
so-called insertion.
Milagro. Kasi the BICAM is often referred to as the third house of Congress. Pero yun na nga, to dispel that myth, to dispel those concerns, the House just purely adopted the Senate's version.
Yeah, exactly.
Verbatim. And so
it's a concession to the Senate actually.
Para mawala na yung...
Parang, okay, look, para ma-appease kayo, gagawin namin kung ano yung gusto nyo. Ganun ang ginawa ng House.
So in fact, yung ilang I watched an interview ni Representative Garin na sinasabi niya, I would have preferred land to be included, but I realized that yun lang in-include ng Senado, yung public utilities, higher education, and advertising. So I'm willing to work with that, sabi niyang ganon. Even though personally sa kanya, mas importante yung land kaysa sa... Pero ganun na nga ang ginawang kompromiso ng Kamara na okay, sige, may suspecha kayo na gagawa kami ng milagro diyan. Ito lang ang pag-uusapan namin. And sure enough, pumasa na ng third reading. So what that means is, as far as kung may milagro man, manggagaling yan sa Senado.
Exactly.
Mangyari. Kasi yung House version, tapos na eh. And that's why maybe the Senate wanted the House to finish first para to prove that
wala na silang maa-add. Wala na silang madadagdag.
Diba? Sila. Yun. So nandun na tayo ngayon. Where the Senate now, it's time for them to make good na ngayon on their word that they will... the Senate President, that kasi the President Bongbong Marcos told Speaker Romualdez that the Senate will take the lead. So they did in terms of drafting. The House adopted. So now it's time for the Senate, led by the Senate President Zubiri, to get the job done, and it falls on. So pero ang Senado, dahil iba yung proseso nila, they didn't convene a committee of the whole. They assigned it to a subcommittee chaired by Sani Angara, so it'll have to go to the committee, and then it will go to the plenary of the Senate, and then so mas mahaba yung, mas maraming steps sa kanila.
Oo.
So, we'll see kung and then, well, maybe that's good in a way dahil not the numbers, baka they kailangan pang kumbinsihin yung ibang senador na bumoto para sa resolution, baka hindi pa
Sa
sila.
tingin ko, mukha naman since may enough time tayo, kasi nga yun yung sinasabi nila, parang deadline nila is yung SONA. So ibig sabihin may oras tayo na kausapin natin yung sino man yung mga medyo on the fence na mga senador. Sana nga. So yun nga, I mean, I'm hoping na tayo ni na ikaw, ako, si Attorney 𝗕𝗹𝗴𝗶, baka nga kung pwede nga kung papayagan si Yusek Gary Domingo na sumama by his boss, no? Siyempre, there's a DFA. Sana makasama, and maybe even the other resource persons, we can have like a session with some of these senators na pwede sila magtanong ng lahat ng tanong na gusto nilang tanongin, di ba? Tapos maaalay natin yung fears nila. Total, hindi naman tayo mga politiko. Hindi naman wala naman tayong interest dito. Ang gusto lang natin ipakita is, look, this is my point of view as an OFW for a long time. Is ganito ang kailangan. In your case, you're also practically like an overseas Filipino, parang overseas Filipino worker in a way. Ganon.
Yeah,
diba? Parang ganon na rin yung case mo. So parang outside looking in, the same thing with everybody else. No? I mean, obviously si Yusek Gary, kasi nga ambassador for many years na rin siya for other countries. Nakita niya rin yung same pattern, no? 'Di ba?
Yes.
Na parang so yung mga ganitong inputs, yun yung kailangan marinig ng mga senador na lalo na yung mga nandun sa parang on the fence na situation, 'di ba?
Yeah, I mean,
sana we can talk to them and have some kind of session with these people.
Yeah. I mean, really, I don't know kung magkakaroon tayo ng pagkakataon ng ganon. So, but maganda sana kung talagang ilalatag yung mga issues. Kasi some of them, I don't think, hindi naman issues based. I mean, hindi naman specific to this issue, yung kanilang concern. It hasn't got anything to do with the merits of opening up the economy. It's more to do with like yung treating the 87 Constitution, like yung isang statement from Senator Hontiveros was that hindi dapat gawing scapegoat ang 87 Constitution for the state, for the lack of jobs and opportunities. So parang it's implying that it's all on the 87, it's all on the, parang in a way politically what it's being interpreted as is it's the EDSA revolution. It failed. Parang ganun yung reading ko. Dahil a constitution naman is not meant to be set in stone.
Kaya nga, it's a living document.
Correct. And we've gone for 7 years now with no revision at all, because it's been so hard, because the provisions for changing it is so,
they make it hard. I mean, look, sa US, let's look at the way the US does it. Sa US, their constituent assembly mode of changing doesn't require 3/4. They require only 2/3. The same as a constitutional convention. If I'm not mistaken, a constitutional convention, I think, is kind of the same as the constituent assembly. 2/3 lang din ang kinakailangan. At least also in the 1935 Constitution, it was also like that. Pero they made the threshold higher. Ginawa nila parang mas mahirap. Ginawang from 2/3. I mean, mahirap na nga yung 2/3 eh. Ginawa pa nilang 3/4, mas mahirap.
They were doing it intentionally.
Oo. And
then you have like former Chief Justice Hilarion Davide, who was a framer. Parang he's extreme ang position niya. not a single word or punctuation mark should be changed sa kanya. Like, it's almost the fault is in the people running the country. They're not following the mandates of the Constitution. Parang sa kanya na infallible yung gawa nung commission na yon.
Oo. Infallible. Kaya weird nga eh.
Infallible, parang word of God ang dating. Parang it's inspired by some divine inspiration. Lahat nung every single word is parang inspired by God. You cannot
including that mistake of I think the mistake in in Article 17 where hindi naman na klaro yung whether it should be voting jointly or separately, which is why we have this ambiguity. May problema tayo dun eh. 'Di ba? Which is inamin nga ni I think it was si Mendoza ba yun? Si Justice Mendoza yata yung umamin na actually, nagkamali kami. Kasi dati, originally, yung 1987 Constitution was supposed to be unicameral. Tapos at the last minute, naging bicameral. So binago namin ito. Pero nakalimutan kong baguhin itong part na to, yung Article 17. Kaya ganun. So,
and si Ascuna said, well, since that's the way it's stated, it's up to Congress now to figure out a way to, they will come up with their own rules to make it work. Parang ganun yung sa kanya. So, kung joint sitting or what, kayo na ang bahala.
This is the problem nga kasi, I mean, from an IT person's point of view, this is basically bad programming, bad application programming. I mean, yung coding, oh my gosh, nagkamali sa pagsulat ng code. May nakalimutan kang ilagay doon. Tapos, ngayon, alam natin na may mali, baguhin mo, ayusin mo, pero ayaw ayusin eh.
Shows how hurried and rushed the commission was in completing its task. And the 40 men and women, siguro kulang din sila in terms of the people needed to proofread it, diba? Parang procedurally they didn't work on the document. My goodness, this is the fundamental law of the land. You didn't like check it for inconsistencies. But anyway, ganun na nga. Kaya nga it's like a Gordian knot eh. Parang no one has been able to untangle it for all this time because every administration has wanted, since Ramos has wanted to make amendments or revise it, and none have succeeded so far. So ito na nga, this is such a modest proposition. Hindi nga lahat ng economic provisions ay babaguhin.
Sobrang compromise na nga siya eh, di ba?
We're not all of the sectors, and we're not even going to change the sharing of 60-40 or 75-25, 100%. It's just going to say, unless otherwise provided, but it's such a modest ask. Diba?
Yeah.
Parang na-scale down na nga sobrang
scale down eh.
And yet many are still parang either sitting on the fence or not convinced, because I think we cannot discount the fact that we tend to think of, we have been brought up or educated in the notion that it would be anti-Filipino or not patriotic or not nationalistic to defend these restrictions. That parang we have equated Filipino nationalism with dapat Filipino first or para sa Pilipino lamang.
Protectionism, yung ganon. I mean, ang lakas, parang kasi lumalabas din, ang lakas nung yung idiotlohiya ni Alejandro 𝗕𝗓𝗂𝗏 and Renato Constantino. I mean that became like in vogue among certain leftist sectors who obviously student organizations. That's kind of like the in thing, no? But parang wala masyado silang inputs coming from other sources or international outlook. Parang masyado silang napako dun sa yung ganong klaseng thinking.
Ang ginawa ko, Orion, dun sa sessions na dinaluan ko or where I testified was I wanted to give the legislators a permission structure to stand up and say no, it's not that I'm anti-Filipino or not patriotic. These provisions are there not because we began asserting our sovereignty. It was there precisely because we lost it to the Americans. It was the Americans who put it, who started this by putting it in the Philippine Organic Act, 1902, during the time of President Teddy Roosevelt, so that they could get it past their Congress, where there was a lot of opposition at the time because they were afraid American businessmen would set up in the Philippines if it became a colony and then trade freely, use the market access of a colony to sell back to the US cheap commodities. They didn't want that. So to prevent, and Americans had done this in Hawaii, used to, and in Panama. And so they didn't want the same thing to happen, so they blocked it. I mean, they inserted these provisions that no American national would be able to own, would be able to open a franchise in utilities, engage in banking, or own vast tracts of land. In the Philippines, they were restricted from entering, so that the colonization of the Philippines wouldn't be prolonged because there were Americans who held interests in the Philippines. That was the intent. Pero so under the American tutelage, when the Americans started to introduce self-governance to us, yung mga pumasok sa Philippine Assembly, sila yung nakinabang. They were the ones who issued the franchises to themselves, and then in the 35 Constitution,
they institutionalize it further. Nilagay nila dun sa
60-40 in those sectors. Natuto sila na, okay, we will now dominate. And that's why Senator Sani Angara, he said, out of all the 18 countries that they surveyed, both advanced and developing, tayo lang ang may economic provisions na ganito.
Sa Constitution, sa loob ng Constitution.
Yes,
diba?
So, ang ginawa ko, sinagot ko yung tanong, bakit tayo lang? And it was a accident of history. And it was a vestige of our colonial past, being a colony. Not because we're asserting our sovereign rights. These provisions are there. We are still in the long shadow, as Attorney Abad said, of that accident of history. Parang nagkaroon ng social experiment. Parang nagkaroon ng social experiment of these colonizers, and up to now, we, the former colony, are still standing in that shadow. Kaya
we didn't think of fixing it, di ba? Naku naman.
It created the political economy that we have today, where only a few control both the politics and the economy of our country. It created that political economy. So yun yung American tutelage na ginawa sa atin. And then now, the grandchildren of those people are completely unaware of where all of this came from. And then yung mga sila Constantino, what they were angry at was nung 1946, when we were granted our independence. So yun na nga, no? The 35 Constitution had the 60-40 rule. It's unique in the world. Diba? Ngayon, sabi ng mga kanaw, teka muna, hindi na nga kami nakinabang nung nandun kami. Ngayon napaalis kami. Hindi pa rin kami pwedeng makinabang. So, and tutulungan namin kayo na umahon.
Oh, we'll be sending you aid. We'll be, helping you out. So,
the second most bombed, devastated city is Manila, di ba, in the war. So sabi nila, bigyan nyo naman kami ng pagkakataon na magkaroon ng mag-invest dyan.
Business opportunities.
In return, we'll give you market access pa rin. No? As a former colony. So we'll give you aid. And ganito, allow the Americans to invest for a period from 46 to 74.
74, 74.
Yeah, oo.
74, 75, yeah.
So yun yung parity rights kung tawagin. Ngayon,
Yes.
yung mga makakaliwa, the Democratic Alliance led by Luis Tarok, yung mga former Hukbalahap leaders, they had run for Congress.
Oo.
They were supposed to occupy their seats. Mar Rojas was the president. To get this amendment passed in our Constitution, the U.S. parity rights, he prevented them from sitting.
Si Manuel Rojas, you mean? Manuel Rojas. Oh.
Because they would not have the votes to pass the amendment. And that was the condition for our independence, ano? So hindi sila pinopo. And then it went to the Supreme Court, and it was decided, you see, by I think 2/3 of those present. Hindi all members.
Hindi all members. Those present. Grabe.
Yun, it was upheld by this. That's why this version of the 87 says all 3/4 of all members. Hindi lang all those
All
present.
present. Oh.
All members.
All members.
Pero nakalimutan na voting jointly ba? Siyempre.
Ayun, nakalimutan yan. Ay, naku.
Hindi na rin nakuha.
Sayang talaga, no?
Nakalimutan pa rin yung hindi pa rin. So, but anyway, that's why yung mga leftists are, because sa kanila, yun yung original sin eh. Na from that point on, bumalik sila sa bundok, di ba?
Namundok pa rin sila. Tinatarok.
And then, hindi siya bumaba until Ninoy Aquino convinced him to go down under Magsaysay's presidency. Si Magsaysay naman renegotiated that amendment so that we would have at least currency, yung setting of our own currency. So yun ang nangyari. Kaya hanggang ngayon, yung mga makabayan sa kanila, yun pa rin ang ano nila na because that was what cost them, like it really cost them a lot. From that point, hindi na sila nakabalik sa Kongreso until now, yung under the 87 framework. So kaya siguro gano'n na lang ang ano nila, turing nila dito sa provisions na to. And then of course, the elite who benefit from this, they also want to preserve it. Kaya nga si Overholt from Stanford, sabi niya, it's a unholy alliance of the
left and the right,
the pseudo nationalistic left and this uncompetitive
elite, oligarchy.
Business industrial elite. Sila ang sila yung mahadlang, yung humaharang.
Here's the thing, Doc, parang what people sometimes forget nga is that if you look at the ranks of itong mga leftist leaders, kunyari sina Joma Sison, Luis Halandoni, yung mga background nila, mga asendero background sila eh. Actually, sa totoo lang, I think even Benito Tiamson and all that, mga mayayamang families galing yung mga yon. Actually, kaya nga it's not hard to see how they are actually in collusion with the elites, because at the end of the day, when they talk about protectionism and keeping foreign investors out, they're actually serving the interests of their brothers and sisters and other relatives who are also from the hacienda owning class. So yun yung nangyayari. That's the reality of it all.
So I wonder, well, it also benefits the movement if there are a lot of oppressed people. Anyway,
yes, pero totoo yun, no? Kasi mas nakakapag-recruit sila ng mga uto-uto at pwede nilang utuin na mamundok kung maraming kahirapan.
May isang si 𝗕𝗭𝗋𝗄 who was also an advocate, di ba? I think.
Oh, yes.
He passed away. He's one of my favorite Filipino authors. So in one of his books, I think it's called The Pretenders. May fictional character doon, pero it sounds very real. It was in the 50s, set in the 50s. So may nationalist senator, Senator Reyes. And then behind closed doors, yun pala, he was the corporate secretary of this American and this Chinese who also owned businesses because they married Filipinas, no? The American, so, and then they're just like behind
Parang
closed
mafia
doors.
pala siya, kabal pala
Oh,
sila.
like having
Small
these
little
drinks and
Oo.
you're listening to them and then he's saying, "De, naharang ko na yan para sa inyo." Parang ganun yung
Ganun
parang
pala.
ganun behind
Oo.
closed. So, it's fictional, but I think 𝗕𝗭𝗴𝗴𝗲, you know, he was was he a reporter at one? Basta he was clued in. So he was mimicking real life.
Oo,
Kasi all
oo.
his novels were like that. It's chronicling the Philippines from the time of the Philippine Revolution all the way up to the 60s. The mass, I think, was set in the 60s leading up to martial law. So that's yun yung in our literature, you know, parang no limitang
Oo
yung
nga.
pinaparody niya yung what the setup was. So itong mga nationalist senators kunwari. And another thing I pointed out in my testimony, yung Filipino first, actually people think that was in the 50s, and then that accounted for the unparalleled growth in GDP that we experienced in the 50s. No, it actually started in after Magsaysay died, and then Garcia took
Kasi
over.
took over, yeah.
I think it was maybe 57, towards the end now of the 50s. And so he introduced the Filipino first policy, which gave preferential treatment to local businesses in accessing the import quotas, import licenses. And actually that was responsible for
a drop.
and for the drop in the output of the industrial sector, because the local merchants or businessmen said, well, why do I have to import machinery to make finished products? I'll just import finished products. Based on that
Grabe.
colonial mentality, I'll bring in finished products and sell it to the elite. So, and then when Macapagal came in, flinote nila yung peso kasi nga, how can you're not earning currency, you're actually bleeding currency. So they devalued the peso, and then but that helped the agro exporters, according to Hutchcroft, who earned more from their exports of sugar, abaca, and the like. And so what did they do with that earning? They bought the luxury goods.
Grabe.
So ganun eh. So the 50s was really like the golden era when there was no restrictions on foreign direct investments from the US.
From the US, yeah.
We know at the time the US was the only economy after the war.
That was strong enough.
Yes,
they were the only ones who were strong enough, yeah.
They were investing in Europe, you know, the Marshall Plan. Europe was just recovering. They were the only game in town, really. The Europeans were not engaging in FDI.
They were still recovering from the war. So,
rebuilding Germany, and then the Japanese the same. The Japanese, however, they were rebuilding so that they could export to the US. So ang missing link lang sa atin during that time. But if we had held on to that policy in the 50s under Magsaysay, if he had not died, kumare, then maybe we could have, kasi you need to do some import substitution. You have to make your own steel and your own, instead of importing these things. But then what are you going to use it for? You're going to make it finished products, and then hopefully the goal is to export it.
Yes.
So we would have made that transition, I believe, in a decade or two, if we had just stuck to it. But the problem was nga, bumalik tayo doon. And so most Filipinos still think that the Filipino first policy was the reason why we were so...
We were progressive daw.
We were progressive, and the answer is protectionism for the local industry. And now under the 80s, neoliberal model where we're liberalizing everything. This is why growth is not recovering. So this is another myth, you know? But we showed that no, it's not the case. Like, sure, Japan and Korea, they engaged in those kind of heterodox policies of protecting their industries. But
protectionism and the so-called national industrialization model, per se.
Yes,
that's what they used.
but they were doing that to eventually export back to the but they were using what's this? They were not in cahoots with the business, or the businesses were not running the show. It was the bureaucrats in Japan and in Korea and Taiwan.
I have this weird theory, you know, because I've been looking around at all these different societies around the world. And then nakikita ko kasi parang yung sinasabing protectionist national industrialization model. Sa tingin ko parang rare lang siya gumagana eh. It seems to work only for certain kinds of societies. Most especially societies na malalamig, so cold countries, where people have, relatively speaking, a higher savings rate. No? So maybe because of the cold, the general population is forced to be a bit more frugal, more savings conscious, etc. Also more hardworking and more focused on long-term thinking and all that, long-term planning. So that it becomes like a national trait among the people, because you really will not survive. Pag
so-called Protestant/Confucian work ethic. Parang
something like that. Yeah, something like that. And it seems to happen mostly in colder countries. No?
And also in political economies where the state is not captured by the business sector. Kasi
yes.
Yun yung long shadow nga na sinasabi ko eh. Because the state was captured early on in the Philippines, because the land reform that the Americans attempted to do failed, and it led to land being even more concentrated compared to the Spanish era. And so when they called elections, sila lang yung pwedeng tumakbo at manalo. And then when they held power, they issued the franchises to their cronies or themselves.
Their cronies or themselves, or their relatives, mga ganun.
So kapag ganon, the state is not able to direct the captains of industry to follow their policy. It's actually the other way around. So that's the whole tale of booty capitalism and ni Hutchcroft. That's the whole story behind that. Is that, and because so we cannot just adopt Japanese their path to development and bring it here without taking a look what were the conditions that made that successful. In the Philippines, we don't have those conditions. So
we don't. Yeah, we clearly don't. The way I see it, like South Korea and Japan, they at least at the very beginning, they're known to have had a higher savings rate among their ordinary population and, of course, among their elites. So it was possible for them to have domestic capital accumulation. I don't see that so much among the situation of the Philippines, or even any other tropical country. And then even among cold countries, some cold countries like, let's say, Ireland, they also didn't have it. So they're a cold country, but they didn't have it. So Ireland only really started to improve itself and end up becoming the so-called Celtic tiger after they copied Singapore's foreign direct investment style of bringing in investors and all that.
Kaya mahirap sabihin yun na it's true. We don't deny that na nangyari yun sa Japan or Korea. But like so the solution in a political economy like ours, where it's the business interests that actually govern the market, not the state. Kasi nga, these businesses will only serve their own parochial interests.
Yes.
You need a strong state that will think of the national interest. And then, so if they're only thinking about selling yung mga food and beverage, kunwari, there needs a state to be saying, no, we need to leapfrog into cars.
Or into industry, in heavy industry, etc. Yeah.
And to guide them that way. That's what Japan was able to do. We didn't have that kind of state here. So
indeed.
In this situation, the best formula is to open up.
Open it up na lang. Let all this huge variety of investors come in.
So, diba? Like you often quote si Lee Kuan Yew, that's what they did in Singapore.
Yes, exactly.
Lee Kuan Yew was afraid the local merchants were going to get too much power or try to unsettle their development path. So what he did, he just let the foreign direct investors come in. So they were bigger players. So then they dominated, and so they could not. The local business could not try to foist their agenda on the government, and it worked. It worked. So by opening up, you counterbalance the that bad political economic dynamic that we have.
Yeah. Anyway, so Doc Doy, we're actually down to our last 2 minutes, so I think we'll go with the final words and all that. Anything that you wanted to share with our audience before we head off?
Yeah, so sa tingin ko, itong economic chacha, may chance pa rin na pumasa to. It seems to have some legs. I'm just worried that some of the senators who have a national constituency are actually more aligned with the business interests that are dominating.
Or some of them are actually part of the business establishment, the oligarchic
I didn't want to say. Or apart from the leftists and the that are there, it's really maybe that's the reason why they're very hesitant. Or the permission structure isn't there because they feel that they need permission to be able to say yes to these provisions. So I hope in the coming days they will start to gain that perspective from the House members, from us, from civil society, and also from if they review from the committee report, hopefully that comes out from Sunny Angara's subcommittee.
All right. Well, guys, thanks again for listening through. Alam nyo, maganda talaga to kapag nandito tayo, meron tayong mga guest katulad ni Dr. Emmanuel Doy Santos. By the way, yung Doy niya ay galing sa Candido na pangalan niya. So, Emmanuel Candido Santos.
Yes.
Doon nanggagaling yung Doy, di ba? At least, baka nagtataka kayo, saan nanggaling yun? So, anyway, guys, so again, Doy, thanks for coming and being my guest here. I'm pretty sure we were able to educate our listeners. Ladies and gentlemen, okay, please tulungan niyo po ang mga taong bayan natin na maintindihan bakit importante itong constitutional reform. At saka mapupuntahan niyo po yung website natin ng correctphilippines.org. So nandyan po yung mga articles and other dissertations and white papers that prove na totoo itong mga sinasabi. Hindi namin gawa-gawa to. So guys, evidence-based ito. Oo. Alright, so guys, thanks again. Maraming salamat sa inyong pagtangkilik sa aming show ngayon. Next time, manood ulit kayo ng Pugad Vloggers. Maraming salamat po. Thank you.
Bye.
Pugad Vloggers, ang kurap titirisin, salot sa bayan wawalisin, walang sasantuhin, ang saya-saya nakakabaliw, kasama natin ang tropang Pugad Vloggers.